Hi, good morning, everybody. I thought I'd just throw in a quick Romaniacs review. Romaniacs tend to be much shorter, and I can get through them much faster. Uh, Today, we're going to look at a Romaniacs review from St. Lucia, which is the Bounty Spirit of St. Lucia rum that was made, I'd say, the 1970s and 1980s. That's this sample that I happen to have here, based upon a mini that I bought off of Facebook at a time when that was still possible. Right now, it's important to understand that the Bounty brand is not to be confused with the same brand name that is issued by the South Pacific Distillery. Right, this, in point of fact, as far as I know, was the first branded rum produced by St. Lucia Distillery in 1972, when they themselves were formed by the consolidation of two distilleries, which was the Dennery Distillery, owned by the Bernard family, and the Roseau Bay Distillery, owned by the Geests. Right, and at some point in the future, they produce something called the Denross, very strong, 80% or something like that rum. So Dennery, Roseau, Denross, there you go. Right. A brief note on the Romaniacs, of course, is that the Romaniacs is a informal collection of reviewers that was started in 2014 and has now fallen out of service, if you will. But the objective was twofold. One, we wanted to review old rums that aren't on shelves anymore, long since out of production, and that you just don't see very often unless it's on an auction site. We wanted to preserve some of the history of how they were made, what the companies were like, who they were, who they appealed to, which country made them, and so on, and all that historical information, which is quite interesting. Secondly, although this wasn't a thing at the time, auction sites have started to become a place where people can find older rums. And the problem there, again, is that information is often lacking, because back in the day, of course, all these rums, if they were referred to at all, was always in print media. And that's not always accessible to anybody. And then thirdly, the next generation of rum pundits, if you will, are going to have to refer to some of these at some point in time if they have any interest in the historical context at all, and they won't have it because nobody will have ever done anything about it. Well, this is our small attempt to keep the history of some very old rums in play, so people know what they're drinking if they ever find one in Grandpa's closet or something like that. Okay, so the Bounty rum, Spirit of St. Lucia, 40% rum. As far as I know, it was and always has been a column still rum. I have some notes on that later on in this review, but I think it's reasonable based upon the way it tastes, right? And it was always considered a workhorse of the brand. Perhaps it's a step down from the Chairman's Reserve, the Forgotten Casks, the Admiral Rodney's, and all the other blends that, of perceived greater cachet and exclusivity that came into prominence as part of the rum renaissance through which we are living. But interestingly enough, the Bounty brand has actually never been retired from active duty. It continues to be sold around the Caribbean to this day. We might not necessarily find it in Europe or in North America or in Asia, but it continues to be made. It's something of a back bar staple when you do find it in the US, something of a mixer's drink for the most part. And the various rums that were developed over time as part of the brand were flavored, spiced, white, aged, unaged, column and pot still blends, and so on. And they retained their popularity for quite some time. So this is sort of like the rum of the entire line, you might say, right? As I say, I bought this as part of a series of minis from the 1970s and 1980s. I wasn't able to trace it any further back than 1972. I think these minis were pretty much sold for hotel, minibar use, or airlines, or presents and gifts and so on, and the aging completely unknown. They never used to reveal all that stuff. As far as I'm concerned, the closest version to this in current production is the Bounty Gold rum, not necessarily the dark, and no rum that has the label that's in the photograph that accompanies this is ever to be found in current production. So let's take a look at it. Well, 40% isn't going to make much of a statement. Let's just start right there. It's a little bit sweet. It's very, very light. It's got notes of honey, mead, molasses, brown sugar, a little bit of a pale ale, actually, just a tiny bit of salt in it. There's also some hay, some sawdust and decaying paper. Yeah, that musty smell of old libraries and secondhand bookstores, with a bit of time to open up. There's a little bit of sweetness coming in there, green peas, cherries, a little bit of yogurt and so on, and even the slightest metallic bite when you lick a penny, that kind of thing. The palate, let's take a look. Well, there's some brine, there's some olives to start, there's nuts, there's almonds, there's nougat. For 40% rum, given what I've been trying over the last little while, this is actually not too bad at all. There's that slight sweetness of molasses and brown sugar, of course, vanilla, raisin, spices, grass. There's a hint of herbs, dill and rosemary, with a very, very short finish, even though that is actually quite aromatic. Spices, brine, a little bit of fruitiness. That's pretty much what you're getting. And that dustiness that I had on the nose, that comes back here. In today's climate, this might not be too far removed from a sipping rum, though I doubt anybody would use it for that if they were to ever find it. It would be a historical artifact or be something that they would put into a mix. And it's nice enough. I think the current St. Lucia distillers, Admiral Rodney's and Forgotten Casks and what have you, they are quite an order of better. The technology has changed. The palates have changed. They've known how to make things a little bit stronger and more interesting with more of the pot still part. But back then, you have to remember what the 1970s and early 1980s was like. Light was still in. Bacardi's light rums, whether it was the Añejo or the white or the Superior or the Gold, they were everything. Everybody was trying to copy vodka. When you made cocktails, it was the fruits and the additional spices and ingredients and cordials and liqueurs that made the cocktail work. The rum was there just to provide an alcoholic backbone. Therefore, the taste of the rum wasn't a thing. And that's why rums like this were made. Nowadays, fortunately, the lackluster profile that we would see in such things has gone a little bit more towards more assertive and aggressive taste as rum has become the thing in cocktails too. But at this time, this one, for all the tasting notes that I've provided, doesn't rate more than 78 points. Part of that is the weakness. Part of that is the sheer faintness of everything that you're tasting. But you know what? As a historical artifact from the past, not too bad. So 78 points, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Oh, a couple of extra notes. In 1993, the Bernards bought out the Geese, because remember, it was something of a joint venture of St. Lucia Distillery, right? And in 2005, they sold out to a conglomerate called CL Financial, who in turn, after their own reckless financial exposure to the crash of 2008, nearly bankrupted them, and they kind of really rogered Guyana in ways that still makes my blood boil to this day. Anyway, they sold out to the Martinique conglomerate of Groupe Bernard Hayot, which is Spiribam, the current owner. Right. And I just thought I'd mention that because, like many companies, they tend to change hands from time to time. And now Spiribam is the owner, and that's where I'm going to leave it. So hope you enjoyed this. And it's brief, but that's what I got for you today. And we'll talk again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.